Welcome to Construction Genius, and my guest today is Fawn Radmanich of Stantec. She is a marketer and career strategist, and she brings a unique perspective on both how employees and employers can cultivate fulfilling, long-lasting careers in the construction industry. Key points that we're going to discuss today: the power of passion and alignment, building relationships for success, and the importance of curiosity and contribution. So whether you're an employer or an employee, today's episode will give you insight into how to develop successful careers for the long term that impact businesses in a tremendously positive way. Thank you for listening today. Enjoy my discussion with Fawn. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Fawn, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
I have you back on because I know you've done a lot of work over the years in helping people with their career development specifically. When I work with my
spot for a marketer to hang out, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So I know you, on the one hand, you're an expert marketer, and I'll make sure the links are in the show notes to our conversation about that, because that was a killer conversation. But then this whole idea of career, when I'm working with my clients, folks who own companies, many times we talk about the concerns that they have with a particular employee. And I ask them this question: what are they doing to justify their paycheck and make themselves indispensable? Thinking about that framework there, how does that relate to someone building a career that has a long-term impact, not only for them, but also for the company and the companies that they work for?
I think my first thought on that, Eric, is when I think about justifying my paycheck, if that's where I'm spending my time, I'm already in the wrong spot. Because if it's a career, then it's not about the paycheck. It's about your lasting impact. It's about the value that you bring. For me, and I think in this case, I'll use me as an example. For me, it was finding the thing that actually made me want to get up and go to work every day and keep doing that. And for me, that was helping people, discovering the impact I could have on other people, which is why I help others with their careers a lot of the time, because I really want to see people succeed. And so finding that passion is actually how you justify your paycheck. But it comes with a big caveat, because it has to be something that makes sense from a business standpoint. So we have lots of people who have passions, but how does that align with the company that you work for? And so it's evaluating that. And sometimes that evaluation is really difficult, because you might be in a spot where you're looking at that and you're realizing, wow, I have this great passion for this thing, but it doesn't actually contribute to my company's bottom line. And it doesn't actually increase my value. And so then you have two choices, really, as I see it then. One choice is you find a way to make that passion work for you in the space that you're in, which is hard to do. Or you leave and you go get something else that actually feeds that passion. Or that's not necessarily what we want to talk about here. We want to talk about how can you take that passion and find a way. But the reality is that sometimes we don't fit in the place that we're in for a variety of reasons. And being honest with ourselves about that is way better than having somebody else be honest with you about it later.
Yeah, right. It's very interesting. As you begin to talk about it, my mind goes back to my mom's family. And let me just explain to you what I mean by that. My mom was born in the valleys of South Wales in the United Kingdom in the early 1940s.
Okay.
And her father was a coal miner. Her brother was a coal miner. Her nephew was a coal miner. And so the question of what's your passion and pursue your passion was not even asked in that context, right? And so this idea of passion is one that's often put out there, but I think you're really harping on the or coming to the challenge with that, because another phrase that I often think about when I'm working with my clients is success is seen as you're solving problems and adding value. And I heard there, as you were talking about aligning passion with the company that you're working with, it has to have that business case to it, which to me is related to solving problems and adding value. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. So I think about that with the passion piece, especially when I was growing up, it was you can be and do anything you want to be. Like, you can do whatever your dream is. And that's true. But we often have a concept of what that dream is or what we should be doing or whatever that is. And it doesn't necessarily align with a profitable position for ourselves.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily align with what a company needs. But we can often, if we're strategic, when I like that word, right? If we're strategic with that passion, maybe what you really like to do is make 3D prints at home every day.
Right.
And you like to paint little figures, and maybe you play Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. I'm going very nerdy right now. But let's say those are the things that you like to do. How do those contribute to a construction career? That's it's a hard thing to see, right? But it might if you kind of take a step back and what is it about that passion that gets me up and gets me going?
So
I like to make things.
Yeah. There you go.
Things.
Yeah.
I like to drive something and a project from beginning to end. Or maybe it's on a marketing side, right? I like to tell a story. I like things that, so if you can find what the thread in that passion is and find a way to connect that to the work that you do, then it becomes much more enriching and much more valuable to you. Once you find value in what you do, you will find the path to finding value for your company.
So what role do you think a company has in helping their employees to clarify and direct where their passion lies?
Well, I think different companies take different roles, but if they're smart, right? Like if they have an employee that they see a kernel of value in even, right? That could grow into something, I think their role is key in helping them develop into that potential future employee, especially younger employees, but also actually other employees as well, because number one, finding new employees is expensive.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. Going out there with a job description that you're looking for that person that ticks every box, that is another fruitless search.
Yeah.
And you're much better off finding someone who has the behavioral opportunity to fulfill a role. You can often teach skills. Now, in truth, in our business, there are things that we need people to come to the table with, right? They need to have knowledge in how to build. They're going to be out in the field. They need to have knowledge in the office skill sets that we need. We're not going to necessarily train somebody from the ground up, but that's often the value of bringing in an intern, right?
Yes.
You're actually going to start somebody the first day, their first exposure, and hopefully build that long-term existence. One of the values that I had working at PCL, and one of the things that they did very well, was bring people in at an intern role. And then because they are an employee-owned firm at like a stock level, it becomes a place where you start to invest in your firm invests in you. And so they have a ridiculous number of people who have been there for 20, 25 years. And in fact, this year, a gentleman by the name of Wayne Melnick is going to be, this coming year, he's going to be retiring. And he's been there, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe he's been there for 49 years.
Wow. Let me ask you about, it's interesting. You're talking about internship programs, and those are tremendous vehicles, both for the people interning and the companies for filtering people out and helping them to find the passion. What advice do you have based on your experience for a construction company as they put together an internship program?
I'm going to have to remember threads of what we were just talking about to come back to too, Eric. So,
Yeah. Hey, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
okay. On the internship side, it really is, structure is really important. That's, I think, the first thing. I think a lot of people hire interns and they just kind of throw them into it. I think having real projects that interns can wrap their arms around and see their own growth and success, you really have them for a very short period of time.
Right.
And so how do you bring them in and give them something meaty that actually something that they can go, oh, this is how this works. And then I think the other thing is exposure to the business, the full business. Don't just bring them in and have them go out to the field and pick up stuff or sweep or follow somebody around, right? Like give them exposure to the office, give them exposure to the different roles out in the field itself. I have a program that allows them to learn about what accounting does, what marketing does, what your virtual design group does. And then, what is it like to actually be a PM on the job? And what is your job there? And then what is it like to actually be a superintendent? Because those are two very different places. And finding that path for an intern can be difficult. They go in going, I want to be in construction. But they don't necessarily know, they don't go, oh, I don't want to run the field, right? Like everybody wants to run the field, I think, coming in, unless they really know that they're more of that office driven place. And then also helping them to understand early on their role in the life cycle of a project, right? That everybody is marketing from the day that they walk in. And then it is a relationship business. Yes, we're building things. But at the end of the day, it is your relationships through subcontractors. It is the relationships with the people you work with day in and day out. And it is the relationships with your clients that make you successful and make us successful.
So the word that popped into my head there is this idea of fundamentals. And you're looking to communicate then through your internship program or expose people to the fundamentals of the business in terms of both the technical aspect and the execution aspect, as well as that relational piece, which isn't necessarily at the top of our mind as we're going into a career or going into an internship.
It's often the piece that we're trying to fix later in the career, unfortunately.
So let's explore that a little bit in terms of building a career, because when I think of that, I think of, when you start, you have no friends and you have no skills. And your job in your career is to both build your technical abilities in whatever field you choose, as well as your relationship network. Having established the idea, and let's say ideally you understand how your passion translates into value for the company that you're working for, how then can I begin to look at those two elements of technical skills and relational skills in terms of building a career?
So that's an excellent question. So it depends. It really does depend. Where are we talking about? Where am I? Am I beginning of my career here? Am I mid? Does it matter?
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning of the career and then we can go from there.
Yeah. So in that younger space, right? Because we're younger then, it's really important for peer connection. And that peer connection is important in a lot of ways. So it's important at your company level, because these are the people that you're going to be in the trenches with, that are going to be the people that you go to when there's a problem. And you want to build that camaraderie because it's going to stick with you throughout your career. Even if you leave that firm, you're still likely to keep contact with these people that you've built these relationships with. Out in the field, they're the day-to-day people. They're the people you have your camaraderie with, right? And really, teams out in the field are made or broken by how well people get along. And so that often people look at it and they think that's the leader's job to come in and give that feeling from the top down, but it really grows from the bottom up and it meets somewhere in between. And so as an intern, your attitude that you bring every day as a young engineer who maybe has some skills and some relationships potentially, it is still that attitude that you bring every day to your job. And then how that impacts people out from there. A lot of people get very siloed in what they're doing, very focused, because they're learning and they're nervous and they're not sure if they're doing it right. And they don't look around them to see who else needs help, who else is struggling. And they aren't necessarily connecting on those same places. But if they do, if they look around and go, oh, this person over here could use some help, and they build that relationship, when they need help, that person's likely to come in and help them. And that helping, give and take is a huge part of your success as you grow. We often look up and look for leaders to hold our hands, and they do need to do some of that. But for the most part, the more you can build your own network, the more you can rely on people who are not at those higher levels, the more successful you will be and more indispensable you will make yourself, because you will actually learn to figure out those challenges and solve those problems without needing to wait at the big boss's door to be able to get that answer, because it's a pyramid. You've got a lot more people down at those lower ranks that have less experience, and you have much fewer people at the top who have all that experience. And so if everybody's funneling up to that 1 or 2 or 3 people, then there's no way they can fully cover everybody. So the more of a self-starter you can be, the more that you can figure out where to get the information that you need, the more valuable you make yourself within your firm and their projects.
It's interesting. So, for the listeners, that's what you should be looking for in these young people that you're bringing on. And I think one thing that you hit on there, Fawn, that's really important is some people just do their jobs and then leave it there, where instead of lifting up their heads and asking those 2 questions, who needs help and who is struggling? And I think that when you're hiring someone, that kind of mindset is what you should be looking for, particularly from a younger person who needs to grow as quickly and as comprehensively as possible.
And curiosity, I think, is the other thing that you want to make sure you're always looking for in somebody, right? Like, How curious are they? How much do they ask questions? Sometimes that can be really annoying for a little while, but the fact that they're curious often will be a huge piece going forward, because they'll stay curious, and you need that.
How does a company create an environment where people are both willing to mentor and willing to be mentored?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for many companies, because again, especially right now, construction's so busy and it's so hard to get good people. And then, they're busy on the job. So how do you take that time and how do you make it? And the only answer I can come up with is intentionality. Intentionally have to create that. And it does actually mean creating spaces outside of the job site where people talk and they meet and they have an opportunity to be their human selves, not their work selves. I think there's opportunity, and I think about this a little bit when you were asking about how to create an intern program. This is something that I think is valuable. I haven't seen it happen very frequently, but I think that a way to create a program that can give interns and even young employees, if you have like a young employee affinity group, access to some of those leaderships, is to create a panelized intern program. So, or not a mentorship program. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
A panelized mentorship program.
When
we think about mentorship programs, we think of one-to-ones, right?
Yes.
Matchy-matchy. It's like a dating profile. Who do you match best with? That's the person now that you're connected at the hip with forever. But really, I think being able to bring in that concept that your top leaders it's a much smaller number of people, bringing them in and putting them in panel discussions that give larger groups access to them and allow them to hear the different viewpoints and how this person could actually help me and how this person could help me. And then creating some mixer time that allows everyone to talk and actually have that more human exchange, not just the stars at the front of the show that I listen to and then I go home, but actually have personal access to. Then you get much more organic mentorship programs and opportunities than matchy-matchy. Inevitably, out on the job site, you're going to have mentorship happening, but it is often much more tactical. And it is also oftentimes what's the word I'm looking for? Transactional.
Yeah. That's a good word.
I need this thing done. I'm going to teach you how to do it. And that's all.
How do you deal with people, or how do you work with people who may be threatened? This is the mindset often. I don't want to teach someone too much because they might replace me. I know that may sound childish or silly, but sometimes that does drive people's behavior. So as a business owner, how should I work with that so that I'm extracting, so to speak, the maximum value from some of my old heads who may be a little reluctant to share that with some of the younger folks?
Yeah. It's interesting kind of taking a step back. One of the things as a marketer, you find, and because I speak a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I get people all the time. I had a boss call me up once and be like, oh my God, did you tell those people all of our secrets about how to do interviews?
Yeah, right.
And I said, I really believe that I can give somebody all of the ingredients that I use and my recipe, and they're going to take it and they're going to do their own thing with it. And hey, if they're successful with it, fantastic.
Yes.
They're still not going to do what I can do with it.
Yes. Now, you see, now let's talk about that, because I think that's really interesting when it comes to building a career. And the phrase that pops into my mind is secret sauce, right? And so one of the things that I think you have to identify, and I think this is even a little deeper than what you like to do or your passion, but what is your secret sauce? What is it that makes you unique? Now, what do you think about that concept, Fawn?
I agree with you. And I think the passion is where it starts.
Yes.
You do have to dig deeper, and it takes time. I think it's uncommon for someone to walk in and know what that is right off the bat, right?
Yes.
Like it's trial and error a bit. And sometimes it's the things you learn as you go. I know that for me, my curiosity has been a huge part of it, right? And my willingness to engage at every level. I started out a very young marketer in the room,
Yep.
working with predominantly men, much older than me. Why should I be giving them any level of advice, right?
Yes.
And curiosity was the way I navigated through that to start, right? Like, hi, I'm a dumb marketer. Help me understand how to do this thing. Oh, that's fascinating. Tell me about what you do. Explain this to me. And that built relationships, right? That curiosity, eventually I could use it to actually ask questions to make them rethink things. And so I didn't have to tell them what I thought. I could ask questions to get them to believe it was their own idea.
Interesting. I think one thing that people can do as they're working with people developing their careers is notice that secret sauce that they have. Because again, I think you said it well. Sometimes we're not conscious about what the secret sauce is, and others may be more aware of it because they're observing it from the outside. So
Yes.
if your leadership in your company can take some time to really think thoroughly about what is it that sets some of your high potential people apart from others, and then actually share that with them, then that can help them to get clarity and double down perhaps in those areas and provide even more value to the organization.
And that gets back to that question that you ask about what role does a company have in developing a person? And that really is that observational role, that helping them connect the dots of the value that they bring. That is an important part. And when they see something in someone, that they then invest in them. I know I had that benefit. I know lots of other people who have had that too. And when their firms have invested in that nugget of potential and those people then deliver on it, the value is immeasurable.
What if you could stop micromanaging and start leading your people? What if there was a way for you to develop your leadership skills that was convenient, that was practical, that was straightforward, and that was specifically for construction companies? My course, The Shift, is that way. It is a self-paced online course with 5 modules that will transform your leadership, and you need to take this course. So go out to the link in the show notes, theshift.constructiongenius.com. Get all the details about the course. There's a ton of free bonus material items that come with the course. There's a 100% money back guarantee. And all you have to do is sign up for it. And if you don't like the course for whatever reason, contact me and I'll give you your money back. Go out to that website that's in the show notes. Learn more about it. It's a course designed for technically skilled professional construction leaders who want to excel at not just building projects, but building and leading teams of people. Check it out. Let's get back to the interview. As someone who's building their career, what is your thought on the value of tours of duty? So, for instance, I know one of my clients, they'll have project engineers work with superintendents, they'll have them work with project managers, they'll have them work even in the estimating department and do these tours of duty over time as they're developing people. Have you seen that before? And have you seen how that works?
I have. I've seen it both intentionally and also organically happen.
Yes.
And I think generally that is one of the most successful ways to, one, discover where someone's true value sits within your group, but also to give each of your roles a greater depth to it. So, for example, I worked with two young up and coming folks to put together an award submission one year. And they had worked on a job together during COVID that we didn't have pre-construction folks available. Estimating was very busy and they weren't working out on a job site. So they came in and they started at that bottom, right? And they did the estimating, they did the pre-construction, and it was a young PM and a young superintendent working together. And what also happened was, because they were working so closely together, they also got a view into what the other one did and how the other one thought. And so they became much more well-rounded as a result. So as they moved forward into other projects, they both had this greater view of what it was like, because they had kind of worn each other's shoes a bit and worn other people's shoes. And that really translated to was the general superintendent, or it wasn't a general superintendent yet, but the superintendent thought a lot more about profit and how to protect it. And the PM thought a lot more about logistics and how things actually had to come together. And so they worked more as a team. And the best projects are the teams in which you have that. And I always kind of refer to it as a marriage, although oftentimes it's a non-sexual marriage, right? It's just,
right, of course.
It's just a business connection. But there are people who have worked together to build things time and time again. And they understand the rhythm of each other. They understand how to work with the other one. And they understand where the flaws are. They also understand where the value is. And they present a united front to their teams. It's not, oh, Sam's got the PM thing going over here, and, Jorge has the superintendent thing going over here, and they're at war together. Because that happens quite a lot as well, is where your PM just sees their job as to run around behind the superintendent and clean up the messes, and the superintendent just sees the PM as the bean counter that sits in the office. And instead, when you have that joint it's really cross-function, cross-training. It really makes for more successful teams, and more profitable jobs.
It's interesting because that goes back to this idea of peer connection and having that mindset that I'm building long-term relationships right from the start of my career, both internally and externally. And one thing I don't want to do, if I can avoid it, is to burn bridges, because these are the folks that I'm going to be building work with for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
It's a small industry.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's weird, right? Because construction is this $1 trillion worldwide industry, right? And hundreds of thousands of contractors. But at the end of the day, it's so tremendously local and so tremendously personal. Let me ask you this. When someone is in a career for a period of time, they may have some successes, but then they may come across some failures. How do you counsel people in their careers when they've experienced some failure? I think particularly, I remember my father one time, he was very successful in his career, but he made an error and actually got demoted. And it had a tremendous emotional impact on him because he took so much pride in the work that he did. How do you work with folks who are going through those downs in their careers? Because we always think it's supposed to be this semi-linear upward path, but dude, it's life. And, we have ups and downs. How do you help people in those situations in terms of their career?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is listening to them. They need to be heard, and it needs to be understood there is an emotional impact that comes with change and what is perceived as failure.
Yes.
And then I think it's helping them actually investigate, is it failure? Sometimes these things happen for good reason. We're going along a path. We think this is the path we want. And then something happens that stops us and we have to reevaluate. And we often will call that failure. But is it? Because now we're reevaluating. And sometimes when we reevaluate it, we actually find a better path. And we would have never done that if we didn't have that stopping point. And I think being able, and failure isn't necessarily bad. I think it's also how you view that word. A lot of the time, failure is bad. That's how we refer to it.
Right.
But human beings don't actually learn from other people's success or even their own successes most of the time. They learn from failure. And so those are the opportunities that we have to learn, look at what we've learned. And so if we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this versus beating ourselves up? And so helping someone to get to that point, which can be a slow process. And quite honestly, I have had that same spot. And I had a very senior leader who to this day I'm very good friends with. But he really was that person who sat in front of me and said, it is time to stop mourning this. It is time for you to take a look at this and ask yourself, what kind of person am I? Am I a glass half full person? Am I a glass half empty person? How do I feel about that glass? And really had to think about that. And I had to put some things in place to change how I viewed my job, change, failure. And it really came down to what is the positive aspect that can come out of this? How can I not be overly positive? I don't want to be, Pollyannas here, right? Like we don't need to be saccharine about it.
Yep.
But, how can I see value out of this learning opportunity? And how can I move it forward? And how can I fix it? Right? Like sometimes that happens. We fail things, but how do I fix it then? How do I make sure it doesn't happen going forward?
It's interesting because as you're describing this, I'm thinking about the balance between ego and humility in a career. Because on the one hand, I need a healthy sense of ego to step into new roles and to seize opportunities. But on the other hand, I need humility to be able to admit what I don't know and also to be able to recover from some of those failures or learning experiences. How do you see that balance of ego and humility as someone is building a career?
The more we focus on ourselves, the bigger our ego gets. And if we keep worrying about where's my career going, what am I doing next, what about me, that ego grows and grows, and that humility kind of shrinks. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if we spend all our time beating ourselves up, worrying about whether or not we can do this thing, that humility piece grows into fear, right? And that ego piece starts to shrink. And we struggle with being able to come to the table the way that we should.
Yes.
And so it's kind of a strange thought, I think, but the more we can start to focus on not ourselves, how do I help somebody else? How do I help make this the best project team that's ever been? How do I make this project the best project? How do I fix this problem? When we start to not focus day to day on me and instead focus on a greater good, that opportunity for that confidence, that we will see our own successes happen through that, right? And we still can maintain that edge of humility because now it's a we and not a me.
Okay, a couple of questions I want to ask you here. Many folks, obviously, in companies are in sort of the middle. What I mean by that is they have people who report to them and they have a team, but then also they have people that they report to. They're part of a team. How does that idea of help come into play when I'm looking up, so to speak, the chain of command and considering how I can help those who are above me, just from a chain of command perspective?
Sure. I mean, so something that we have to think about is everything that we do reflects on those people who are above us. So if my focus on doing a great job is not because I want to get a promotion and I want to be able to be seen, but instead it's to help my boss be seen at the next level, help his boss even be seen at the next level, or her boss, whichever way it goes,
Sure,
right?
of
Like
course.
help that next level in any way I can. If I'm happy to help, then it puts me in that, again, going back to your first question, that indispensable position, because now you're willing to play wherever.
Yes.
And it's a great attitude to bring every day. And you can also still keep track of your own desire to move forward as a part of that.
How do I manage myself when I've been passed over for a promotion? Because this is part of one of career realities, right? You have one position, you have two people going for it, and maybe I got passed over, not necessarily because of me or something a limitation on my part, but it just went to the other person. How do I handle that?
Well, I mean, so personally, we're going to have some pretty tough discussions with ourselves about, just being open and curious about why and being okay with it. And I often tell people, like, if they've been passed over for something, I say, that's great. It's just like marketing in a pursuit. Now you have an opportunity for a debrief. Now you get to come back in and say, hey, could you sit down with me and talk to me about this? Because the next time this opportunity comes up, I want to be the person that you select. And so how do I do that? And what's the path? What are the things that I could be doing differently that would have made me that person so that I can start to make those changes? The other thing is you might want to ask yourself, did I really want it? Is it the only path, right? Does it have to be this? Or can there be other ways that I can make an impact? And that's what it comes down to too. Like, why do you want that promotion? Is it just so that you can have a higher level? Are you looking for that bigger paycheck? Want a bigger bonus?
Or even the title.
Or the title, right? Like,
Yeah.
is that what it is? Or is it about something deeper? And I think the more people can think about their impact and the value of that impact, then it doesn't matter what they call you, because it's not about a title. It's about how you impact the people around you. And it is about the people. And the better positive influence you have on the people around you. And this is a 360-degree influence, right? Up, sideways, down. Yes. But the more value you can have in that impact, better positivity, then the more valuable you are to the people around you. And it really doesn't matter what they call you, because the value is what actually moves you forward.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this phrase always pops into my mind. Good help is hard to find. And if you're good help, then there is no limit to what you can achieve in your career, particularly in construction, where there's such a variety of things that you can do to make a positive impact in a company.
It's about solving challenges. It is. It really is about, what is the challenge ahead of us? Is it a project challenge today? Is it a people challenge today? And it comes with curiosity. Can you ask enough questions about this to truly understand it and be able to come up with solutions that maybe others weren't able to come up with? And it doesn't have to be yours. Maybe you can help to influence a group to come up with the solution, or someone else, but being a part of it and helping to keep people curious and looking for those opportunities is some of our greatest value.
Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying the conversation. Quick reminder, here's my book, Construction Genius. Effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS. Leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. In here, if you're thinking about building a career or developing those who are building careers, you'll find so many great nuggets. Run out to Amazon right now and buy the book. You will not regret it. In fact, if you did buy it and you didn't like it, shoot me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com. I'm going to send you $20 because that's how much this book costs. $20 on Amazon. And if you don't like it for whatever reason, I will Venmo you $20 because I want to make sure that you are satisfied with the book. That's a good deal, huh? All right, let's get back to the conversation. It's interesting. I'm going to ask this both from an employee perspective, but also an employer perspective. When do I know it's time to move on?
That's a hard one because it depends. Some of
Well,
us
let me
move
give you an
on.
example.
Great.
Okay, so I remember when I made a radical shift in my career, I was selling copy machines, right? You guys remember what copy machines are, right? And
Yes.
that's what I did when I first got out of college. And I was working for this company and we were kicking butt. We were having a great time. And then I had the opportunity to get into the beginnings of what I'm doing now, leadership development and all that kind of stuff, right? And I remember when I announced to these guys that I was leaving, one of there were two partners, and one guy said, Eric, you're going to kick ass. You're going to be totally awesome at this. And then the other guy said, Eric, I'm not sure that it's really going to work out for you. You might want to stick at what you're doing. And so I was, it's really interesting dealing with that. I knew it was time for me to move on, but then those who were influencing me perhaps didn't have that same perspective. How should an employer look at the career of the people they employ, particularly at that point where maybe someone who you value is saying, I have another opportunity, I want to move on? How do you handle all of that?
I think that's an interesting thing to think about because as an employer, we often have employees who are extremely valuable to us, right?
Yeah.
Like they do a lot of the things, and then out of the blue, they come forward and they go, well, I'm going over here now because I need to make more money. I want to do something different. So I think the first step is hearing what they're bringing to you and why they're moving on, right? And asking yourself, like, can I do what's best for this employee? Because if they're coming to you and saying they need a change and they're sure of it,
yes,
and you're not, you need to ask yourself what you didn't see, what you didn't hear, what are you not providing for that employee now? Because the better way would to have been to catch that before then. I think likely that employee gave hints that they were probably going to be heading out the door. There were signs that this wasn't fulfilling for them anymore. And so if you're not paying attention to those signs, then this is going to surprise you.
So let's explore that a little bit because we're kind of getting to this idea of not just me developing my own career, but as a company thinking about career development for my people. And a lot of employees, employers, they're just, let's say they have a project manager who's kicking butt and they're like, dude, I want this project manager to always be kicking butt on the next project. But maybe the project manager is thinking, I'd love to be a project executive and I'm done building projects. I want to move on to something else. How does an employer balance their need for them to solve this problem over here when the employee is beginning to think about other problems that they want to solve? How do they discover that? How do they go through that process?
I think we all have career performance reviews now that they're required.
Well, not all of us. Well, it's funny though, because you say that, but then a lot of construction companies They don't do this. I mean, they know perhaps intellectually they should, and they read the books, but really, dude, I got the next project to build, and let's get that sucker built because we need to make money.
And that is a problem. Even companies that have the formalized process, and you have to do the thing, it is a check the box ritual versus a discussion that needs to be had. So the first step is recognizing that those discussions are important and they're not annual. They are consistent throughout the weeks, the months that you're working with an employee. The reality is if you get to an annual review, if you even get one, because there is that doesn't happen, right?
Yep.
But if you get to an annual review and your employee is surprised by feedback they receive, you as a supervisor have not done your job, because they should have heard that, unless it happened last week.
Yep.
Right? We should have been getting that regular feedback.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to happen in formalized ways. It can happen in very organic ways, just touching base with an employee, having coffee with them once in a while, even just stopping by their office. Those are, I think, better ways to touch base. In truth, if you have an employee, and we don't do this well as companies, we don't plan for this well for our employees either. They say that if you have a direct report, you should anticipate that 1 hour of your day is likely to be dedicated to that direct report. Well, if you have 8 direct reports, your entire day is managing your 8 people.
Yes.
And if you have more than 8, everybody's getting a little bit less of you than they should be getting. Now that, it ebbs and flows and it depends on how that works. But if you think about it that way, if you're supposed to be spending hypothetically an hour a day working on it may be working with an employee, maybe working on their case, whatever it is, right?
Sure.
But they should be getting regular feedback from you in that. You should be having regular meetings with them in some way.
It's interesting for you to think about as an employer. How many times have you been blindsided by one of your talented people leaving the organization? And if it's happened more than once, I know it does, but then you've got to ask yourself, why do I keep getting blindsided? What am I missing? What conversations am I not having? What signals have I missed because I'm not spending time with that person and really thinking through with them and talking with them about what they want to achieve in their career?
And as a larger employer, right, if that's happening and you're seeing it consistent with certain employees that supervise employees, you might want to be thinking about they may be needing to change who is managing the people.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what are some of the main ways that someone unwittingly sabotages their careers so that when that promotion opportunity comes up, they are the first to get passed over as opposed to getting that opportunity?
It's a good question. I think a lot of the time it actually starts with that ego and humility piece that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So if you are too confident in your skill set and you just know you're the person and it's going to be you, no doubt about it, but you're not really leaning into that. You're not curious about it, and you're not necessarily helping the people around you. Most of the time, you're not actually doing all the things that a firm needs you to do. And so you often can get passed over because you are too siloed, because you're too confident, because you're too egotistical, because you're probably not building relationships with people. Because if that's your view, then people aren't coming to you and wanting to be a part of things. And let's face it, especially in construction teams, your better mentors are the ones that you see move faster, because they can build and sustain a team. And that is what builds projects. A person does not build a project.
I'm thinking about this idea of getting passed over. I'm thinking about this idea of developing a career long term. And when someone is in a position where they're at a pivot point in their career, where they could perhaps move to a different company or stick with the one that they're at right now, what kinds of questions should they be asking themselves as they're thinking through that opportunity?
Well, I think the one I would start with is, am I fulfilled? And what does fulfillment mean for me? I think another question to ask is, am I motivated? And what does motivation mean for me? Because here's the other thing, I think this is something employees do a lot of the time, is they job hop, they jump to another company, better title, better pay. But here's the thing, wherever you go, there you are. And you bring all the problems that you had before with you. It does not matter that you went to a new employer, because you are still you. And you are still going to approach things the same way. So the question, I think the big question, that idea of fulfillment and how am I motivated, I think what I'm trying to say get to with that is, if I make this change, is it really going to change anything? What am I trying to change?
It's interesting, isn't it? How do you help someone when they get promoted? Let's say they get into a new role then, and there's an area of incompetence that they have. There's that little model where we have unconscious incompetence. Mm-hmm. We have conscious competence, and it goes from there to unconscious competence, all that kind of stuff. I get promoted, let's say, first 30, 60, 90 days. What do I need to focus on in order to become competent in areas where perhaps I'm not, so that I can become confident and really fill in and step into that new role?
I think the first 30 days, you have to figure out what those areas of competency are. Understanding that, which means that you're in a listening mode. If you're taking a role that you hit the ground running and you're not getting any time to actually understand what you need to be doing, you're going to need to, and those that exists, right? Like for, especially in construction, we're not giving you 30 days to just sit around and figure your stuff out.
That's right.
So how do you build that time in when you have to be actively rolling forward?
Yes. I think one of the things to do, and I really, it's interesting, the further you get up in a company, perhaps the more disconnected you can get from actually where the company makes money, which is putting in work, in the field. And one of the things that you can do when you get into a new position, particularly if perhaps you're running projects that you're not familiar with, or you're in a technical area that you have no experience with, is do whatever you can in that first 30 days to get boots on the ground in the places where you're building the project, so you can begin to figure out some of those nuts and bolts that are essential to coming to a level of competence.
Yes. And the higher up you go, the more listening you have to do, right? The further down you are, the more you have to figure out, how do I learn to do these things, right? And I think with leaders, to your point, like they often have lost some touch, or especially if there's a geographic change or a subject area change, right? Really getting in there and getting to one, know the work, and two, know the people that are doing the work are the two most important things that you can be doing. And sometimes it's hard and you don't always have this opportunity. But if you can, if a company is really saying, we need you to accomplish this thing, and whatever it is something that can wait even a little bit, I would push for that time to actually say, I need to do this because I'm going to do this so much better if I actually understand what I'm getting into. And we don't always have that luxury. So if we don't, then it means recognizing that first 30, 60, 90 days, you're going to be putting a lot more in during that time than you would put in 6 months down the road, a year down the road, because you won't have had to have that ramp up.
Yeah, so you've got to identify those experts that you're now going to be in contact with, and do whatever you can to get with those guys and gals and to tap their experience, tap their expertise, which can then help you to build your own competence and confidence in that new role.
And that's where those relationships that you build early on in your career and you hopefully have maintained throughout become very important, because those are the people that you're going to be picking up the phone and calling and saying, or I guess picking your phone and texting maybe now, right. In reaching out to and saying, I am in a new situation. How can you help me get to where I need to go? They may not be the actual person, but they may be giving you the warm introduction to the person you need to be talking to.
So there's this quote from Orwell that I like, where it says that every generation thinks that it is more intelligent than the generation that comes before it, and wiser than the generation that comes after it. And that can create tension, right? The young people can think, man, that guy really doesn't know what's up in terms of technology and culture and where the business is going. And then the older folks can look at these young people and say, these guys are clueless. They have no wisdom at all. When it comes to being a younger person in construction right now, we're recording this at the end of 2024. What advice do you have for young people in terms of not getting tripped up by their own intelligence and exuberance and tapping into the wisdom of the old heads in the business?
I think it really comes down to that, that I'm always going to come back to this, that curiosity space, right? It's really, the more curious you are, the more open you are to new experiences, to new ideas, and the more you can help to facilitate other people being open to new experiences and new ideas. And so the more you can ask questions and listen and take the answers to those questions and ask more questions so that you can fully think about that and then reflect on it, I think is the first step I would say to anybody. We all of us should assume, I heard this recently, actually, I thought it was really great. All of us should assume that we are at least in part wrong.
Yes.
No matter what, we are always wrong. And so the only way to actually figure out where you're wrong is to surround yourself with people who think differently from you, who you disagree with even, or even people that you might dismiss. And then you have to be curious with those people to help understand where are those places that you need to adjust your thinking so that you can be less wrong.
It's interesting because many times what happens with young people, I think, is they come into a business and they either seek to impose their own views on other people, or they come across people who have different views from themselves, and then they just kind of shut down. And that willingness to be exposed to different ideas and different views is really a crucial part of building a successful career.
It's a struggle though, Eric. I mean, one of the places that I know has been a struggle for people in my side of the industry, in the marketing side, for women, is they're really afraid to be seen as not knowing.
Yes.
So they don't want to be seen as unknowledgeable. So they're afraid to ask questions because then they might be seen as less than. And I've seen that time and time again. And so what they do is they arm themselves with what they know and their space, and they go in and I'm going to tell you how you have to do this because I'm an expert in my field and I understand this. And people just don't really react well to that. And what I found a lot of the time as a marketer working with technical people is that if I ask more questions, they're more willing to, and I try to see it too from their perspective, they're more willing to engage with me. And again, it comes back to that curiosity. How can I help you? Because ultimately, I do have something I need to do, but how do I help you help me?
Yes. It's almost as if you're taking the job very seriously. You're perhaps not taking yourself too seriously, and you're not stuck in just your own perspective, but you're bringing your perspective to the table, understanding that that's part of a larger perspective that contributes to the success of the organization.
I think the more you can find a way to have it not be you saying, this is my thoughts. For me, and I think we talked about this, I think this came up last time. If I can say to someone, well, that's interesting. If I were the client, how would I feel about this? If I were the client, I might think this way. And so I'm not telling you this is what Fawn thinks. I'm telling you what the client thinks, maybe. So it's the same kind of concept if you can kind of deflect it from being my opinion. And it doesn't mean that they don't have value to bring, because the other side of it, and you said this, is that you have leaders who look down at the young folks coming in and go, gosh, they're never going to be able to do this job. But in all honesty, when you're talking about like mentorship, you should, if you are a mentor, young people, you should have a mentor who is a young person.
That's interesting. Tell me more about that. That's an interesting thought.
Well, because mentorship comes in lots of ways.
Yes.
You may be mentoring in years of experience in the industry, skills that you've acquired, even just how to show up every day at work. But they can mentor you in how to connect with people at their age, how to help them help themselves, right? How to bridge that relationship gap that exists just generationally for us. And so you can have generational mentors that help you to connect better into those generations, especially if you're a leader who's managing a job site, who may potentially have 3 to 4 different generational influences coming in.
Very interesting. I know we could talk about this for much longer. I actually have a lunch that I've got to get to with a client of mine. So what I'd like you to do here, Fawn, is just sum up for us, if you can, 2 or 3 pieces of advice that can be taken by both an employee and an employer in terms of how to develop a killer career.
Okay. Well, I think number 1 is lead with curiosity. Number 2 would be to listen, which those 2 go together. I think number 3 is ask yourself, how can I help? How can I help my employee? How can I help my firm? Number 4 would be understand your firm, if you're an employee, and what is needed in order to make money, to maintain client relationships, what is success for the firm. And on the firm side of it, helping to really connect those dots for their employees. What does success look like for the firm, and what is their part in that? And helping them to really see that full picture so that both can help each other.
That's great. So again, curiosity, listening, asking how I can help, and then defining success both in terms of the firm's success and the employee's success. If we keep these things in mind, we can help others to build successful careers and then build successful careers ourselves.
Yes, I think that's true.
That's killer. Fawn, I really appreciate you joining us. Again, man, we just went through an hour really, really quickly there, but I know there's tons of great value in our discussion here. I really appreciate you joining us here today on Construction Genius.
Thank you again, Eric.
That hour went very quickly. What a great time with Fawn today. I really appreciate her time. Hope you got some gems here that'll help you develop your career or develop the careers of those who work for you. Feel free to go back over the podcast and dive deep into the lessons from the session. In addition, you can also find in the show notes a link to access my career dashboard, which is a framework that you can use as a coaching tool for yourself or for others to help in the development of a successful career from the perspective of both up-leveling your technical skills and your relational skills. So those are the two keys to a successful career. So check out the show notes, get that download, enjoy. And if you have any questions about your career or the career of someone in your organization that needs to be developed, contact me, because I work with a variety of construction executives, helping them to perform at the highest possible level. And you can find me on constructiongenius.com. I look forward to talking to you. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.